The last two lectures summarize some of the main ideas discussed in the fourth chapter of the book. The 10th lecture, which I will present now, expands the discussion from the energetic genetic estimations and behavior of the individual to those applicable to human groups. So far, I've been mostly interested in the human individual, and now aim to shift the focus of the discussion towards human groups. Groups can be treated as spatial assemblies containing two or more individuals. They are typically gathered around the expression of certain beliefs in the minds of their members and are frequently classified by means of these members' joint traits. Shared beliefs can lead some or all the members of a given group to directly or indirectly collaborate in spacetime. With respect to a specific individual in the group, none, some, or all the other members might belong to his or her individual ecosystem, and each individual in such a group can simultaneously associate to other groups gathered around different beliefs. I refer to the largest human group that we know of as humankind, regardless of the significant heterogeneity in the countless beliefs of its members and the members' awareness to being a part of this assembly. Giving these definitions, I ask whether there are differences between the individual energy perception and the energetic considerations motivating groups of individuals. To complement this question, it is also possible to ask in what ways decisions and actions of groups, as responses, concerning the genetic goals of the members are different from those made and carried out by their individual human components. Now, I cannot and definitely do not aim to cover the entire range of sociological and anthropological considerations applicable to groups. My main goal here is to emphasize the elementary differences between the individual's energy perception and what I call the group's energetic considerations that lead to a given executable reaction, as well as to inquire the validity of the PPD with respect to these considerations. One central thought that might help us approaching these questions suggests that due to the physical, in quotation marks, fermionic separation of minds in spacetime, group energetic considerations can only exist as a spatially distributed, convoluted set of communication-mediated mind conversion outputs. Under these conditions, the energetic considerations behind executing the group's response, which are encoded within this emerged macro structure, differ from the plain sum of energy perception outputs of its members with respect to the same reaction. Before discussing the characteristics of human groups, I wish to note the prominent set of macro-scale behaviors emerging from us, different individuals who are driven by the same genetic incentives. The emerged behaviors reflect our energetic struggle over the resources which facilitate the fulfillment of our inherent goals. Now, unless discovered otherwise, human life is believed to be confined to Earth, a habitat of a relatively limited surface area as habitat, on which a certain number of humans, to be referred to by the notation n at t present, dwell at any present observation time t observed. At this specific instant, it is possible to refer to the distribution of spatial contents that are accessible to humanity and can potentially be utilized for the needs of its members. I regard this content as holding what I call practical potential usability for mankind, in short PU, and an energy projection of EPU at t present. One may realize that some of the PU resources have been long existing in the habitat, while others could have arrived from external dispersing sources closer to the present of their observation. The ability of humanity to utilize the PU content depends on the capabilities of its members at a specific observation present to collect and convert it for their needs. That is, under the proper circumstances that enable it, at least some of the PU resources are being effectively received and/or collected by the living individuals who convert them to genetic benefits. Now, one of the basic ideas overlooked by this simplified presentation is that both the total number of individuals n and the PU resources are unevenly distributed over S habitat. This is reflected by different densities of population and potential resources across the planet. Whereas from a global perspective, we may expect a relative geographic correlation between the two densities, I can also assume an additional linkage between local concentrations of humans and the availability of catalysts in these localities. Such catalysts increase the accessibility of the resources to the population and allow a minimized investment of additional human efforts in their conversion to energetic genetic benefits. As I noted earlier, one factor contributing to changes in local densities of populations is migration towards areas believed to be abundant with resources and catalysts. Resembling in some aspects the natural need for a certain proximity between entities in order for physical forces to potentially trigger interactions and reactions between them, the closeness formed by the gathering of the population in the coveted areas accelerates human interactions and exchange of beliefs, and as such is a prominent factor in the assembly and growth of groups, societies, and cultures. Hence, one may point out on the interplay between beliefs-catalyzed gathering and gathering-catalyzed exchange of beliefs as contributing to the roaming of humans across the habitat and to the formation of groups, while these patterns can also help explaining correlations between distributions of habitants and energy resources. Now, unless effective and constructive cooperations between individuals are formed, we can also expect that upon arrival of a large number of humans exceeding a critical amount to energetically attractive destinations, the potency of the local resources and catalysts to ameliorate the expanding population will eventually start to decrease. Under such conditions, an expected escalation in the local struggle might lead to different consequences, and among them, for example, to a possible emigration of weaker populations from the energy hub. Considering our common, hereditary-based mind mechanisms and functional traits, the actions of connecting with others and forming groups seem to be both likely and reasonable. In fact, the social behavior behind these binding actions can be perceived as such, despite the global energetic struggle which appears in many ways as favoring unsocial acts and selfishness. With our separated minds communicating through transfers of beliefs and related information, cooperation between humans is often considered. Depending on the bi- or multilateral energetic considerations and interpretations of the participants involved, these might evolve into social association processes leading to formation and/or expansion of functionality-generating groups. Once formed, the human assemblies are potentially subjected to a dynamic competition between association and dissociation processes. The latter tend to reduce the group size and under certain conditions can even disintegrate them. The balance between the opposing trends plays a critical role during the initial growth of the assemblies from their social nucleation cores, impacting their size, inner structures, and stability. These properties may contribute, even if indirectly, to affecting the operational decisions taken and the realization of their subsequent actions. Now, the self-inclinations to stay associated or dissociate are normally impacted by the unique individuality state and perception of the energetic self of each group member. Many of these personal decisions are significantly biased by the psychoenergetics of the members, as well as by beliefs and expectations regarding the group itself. Such beliefs concern, for example, the group's proven and potential functionality and functions, its specific participants, internal structure and communication features, and so on. With that said, the formation of groups of collaborating people often requires certain interactions which typically rely on shared motivations to realize, conserve, and improve the individual members' genetic goals and achievements. Other incentives can be ascribed, for instance, to finding stabilizing order patterns in order to alleviate the members' psychoenergetic fears, especially the fear of absolute abandonment, and to satisfy different needs. While shared beliefs often act as a glue uniting the group members, they cannot entirely suppress the natural forces driving the energetic struggle inside the assembly. Despite the struggle, the overall functionality generated by the collaboration often appreciably ameliorates the members' individual energetic genetic states. This is often achieved via a synergistic effect, increasing the accessibility of the members to potential resources or catalysts and accelerating shared recruitment processes. As one may expect, one potential merit of this effect in regard to the collaborating group members and their individual ecosystems is appropriation of a relatively enhanced fraction from the overall potential usability PU resources of humankind. At this point, I will deliberately skip some of the topics discussed in the book, such as the additional advantages of associating with others and inhibitions like refraining from association. Nevertheless, I would like to add and note that in the light of the global energetic struggle, every decision to join a group holds a risk for its taker, and as such requires a certain degree of the aforementioned conservation-related trust. As has already been insinuated, I believe that compared to the individual energy perception and his or her perception-based behavior, energetic considerations of groups and group functions emerge from even more complex structures in spacetime, corresponding to collections of discrete mind contents, each biased uniquely while contributing to the generation of functionality. This spatially separated complex macrostructure is normally united around certain common beliefs which I expect to reflect a relative resemblance in some mind contents of its human components. Furthermore, it is possible to ascribe to the members of this assembly contributions of what I call componential functionality. These contributions serve as the building blocks from which the overall group responses eventually emerge and include, among other instances, receiving inputs, processing them, and making decisions before the collaborative reaction is produced. Now, the enhanced complexity and diversity involved in these dynamics normally increase with the group size and the expanded set of individuality dimensions by its members. With that said, in addition to other triggers, the exchange of beliefs inside the group leads some individuals to adopt some of the energy, self-perceptions, and reference points of others, which can then affect their assessments of different relevant to the group events in spacetime. Moreover, due to the different inner forces acting inside the group and such exchanges, some personal motivations and inclinations of its members become balanced out or attenuated. So, the energetic struggle to which the members of a given collaborating assembly are subjected to is not only directed towards the external to the group world, but also invades the internal group dynamics and structure. Accordingly, I believe that the inner struggle holds a substantial potential to affect the overall functionality produced by the assembly. One good example concerns the elementary property of polarity, which emerges in different forms from the human struggle. Polarity can be ascribed in general to perceived gaps between different states of individuals, regardless of the latter's association to any group. Yet, I emphasize that polarity effects from within groups are believed here to hold meaningful implications to their responsive reactions. A notable instance exemplifying that relates to the specific distributions of emotive vectors evoked in a certain individual while comparing himself or herself with other group members. These self-reflections of projected polarity occasionally induce a strong biasing effect on the individual and impact his or her componential functionality contributions. Currently, I would like to mention two elementary manifestations of polarity that are biasing responses of human groups. I call them genetic polarity and leadership polarity. In our context, genetic polarity can be associated with individually perceived differences between the energetic genetic achievements of group members. In this case, a specific emphasis is placed on the possession of external potential resources, to which I have previously referred to as ESTP. While assessing his or her relative superiority or inferiority to others, each individual is normally using the perception of energetic self as a reference. Moreover, I expect the individual to believe that some external to the body resources in his or her, as well as others' possession, can be converted to promote the realization of all genetic targets from survival to offspring enhancement. Genetic polarity often exists in groups without being clearly visible to the external world. Nevertheless, under certain conditions, its effects might be dramatic, and as such can even lead to establishment of distinguishable classes amongst humans. Either subtle or dramatic, I argue that inner group comparisons indicating unequal achievements and substantial energetic gaps between members produce an effect of agitation. Upon crossing a certain psi-function related threshold, an unbalanced agitation state may trigger internal reactions in the group. These hold the potential to unfold to an extent that impacts the overall produced functionality or that catalyzes dissociation. A second type of polarity relates to leadership. In this comparative assessment, the higher the individual is believed to be ranked, the more power he or she is expected to have in regard to directing, and thus methodically impacting, the group's energetic considerations and decisions. As we all know, throughout history, and probably ever since the dawn of humanity, some individuals and groups have either taken upon themselves to lead others or have been crowned by others to be their rulers. Many circumstantial factors have been involved in determining the identity of these leaders, including struggles and investment of efforts, psychoenergetic effects, and ethia. While leading does not necessarily turn the leaders into the strongest individuals in the energetic struggle, it may provide them with several relative advantages in comparisons with their subjects. It should be noted that all of us become exposed to basic aspects of leadership polarity via experiencing and responding to the behavior of our guardians throughout the early stages of our lives. Now, leadership polarity leads to formation of belief-based distinct classes among humans, which are usually more pronounced than in the case of genetic polarity. Natural aspirations of individuals to advance in these drive them to try and climb up the ladder in occupying leadership and influential positions, holding various functions in different groups. Relevant positions in this regard, including managing, commanding, inspecting, and the likes, vary with respect to the ways in which we categorize the assemblies. Such categorization may consider the specific motivations and functionalities of the assemblies, their hierarchical and organization features, characteristics of obedience to the leadership, internal paths of communication, and interaction, also in this regard to sharing resources and other related traits. Next, I assume that the effects of polarity can be entwined with other factors which impact the overall functionality of the group. One may describe this combined set of influences by an extended bias function of reduced physical origins to be referred to as an extended function of psi. The extended function includes more biases as compared with the unified impact function associated with each individual member of the group. Among the additional impact considered, it is possible to note, for example, the effects of social interactions inside the group and with the external to the group world. I believe that this broad range of influences and polarities among them affect both the energetic considerations of the human assembly and the componential contributions of its collaborating members to the emerged functionality. Scrutinizing the biasing effects, it seems that individually assessed in quotation marks excited mind states propagate through agitated individuals and subgroups. This effect resembles in certain ways the previously mentioned traveling disturbances which were assumed to cross the sensor-responsive pathways. Unless getting cancelled out or dissipated, the propagating excited states may reach the group's leadership and affect its decisions. Above a certain threshold of agitation, and when appropriate conditions are met, this process may induce reorganizational and even functional changes in the group, and under extreme conditions, it can trigger disassembly or lead to reactions which bypass the leadership. Combined with other effects described under the extended bias function, the propagating agitation may affect the macro-level functional contributions by the collaborating members. Depending on the operative functions of the group and the conversion processes they rely on, individual contributions may include, for example, reception of information or of physical content, processing and producing, managing and leading, stabilizing and regulating, recruiting resources from the external to the group environment, and so forth. Accordingly, it is quite clear why many collaborations attempt to track down some of the biases and predict their reoccurrences in order to optimize self-performance. These actions are often accompanied by artificial attempts to impose and enforce behavioral rules and social norms to regulate the emerging polarities and their effects. Based on these concepts, it is possible to correlate different, what I call socio-energetic factors, with the structure, stability, operative considerations, and performance of human assemblies. Now, contributing to the complexity of these connections are also the natural, inherent inclinations of the group's individual members to prioritize the amelioration of their own ecosystems above the profits of genetically less related members. Some of these selfish propensities and other profit-based prioritizations are being scrutinized by several scientific disciplines, and among them the mathematical field of game theory. Another important point is that I expect that the group's energetic genetic considerations are consistent with the previously mentioned individual response channels. This suggests a certain similarity between the macro and the macro considerations made. Yet, when it comes to group assemblies, more potential reaction channels are naturally available. Incorporating or dismissing individuals into or from the assembly, disseminating, compartmentalizing, or encrypting communicated data, and implementing inner group reorganization by imposing, for instance, new policies regarding conversion and responses, sharing gains and losses, and etc., demonstrate just a few examples for further possible actions by groups. In view of all these concepts, one may identify several functional and operational similarities and differences in responses made by individuals and human groups. Scrutinizing the energetic considerations of the group, I suggest that despite the contribution of the individual energy perceptions to the overall functionality produced, due to effects of emergence and the involvement of the extended biases, it might be hard to identify the absolute contribution of each individual in the entire group response. One may notice some maybe fractal-like resemblance in this assumption to the difficulty of pinpointing the contribution of a single sensory receptor to the individual sensor responses. The assumption thus insinuates that group energetic considerations are never simple sums of their members' energy perceptions. Further interesting to assume is that regardless of the differences between the individual and the group energetic considerations and the collaborative behaviors which evoke from them keep reflecting physical principles and laws of nature and display some sort of perceptive physical dimension-governed patterns. The integration of physical principles in decision-making and behavior of different groups might be, nevertheless, hard to pinpoint due to the extended set of influences acting on the higher complexity human assemblies entailed. One may also notice that some of the elements contributing to the extended bias function have organic, namely tangible, physical analogs in spacetime. These can be exemplified with the polarity. Among the diverse instances of polarity in nature, it also participates in the formation of the human responses and has a critical physiological importance in regard to the membrane-regulated activation of the receptor cells, initiating the sensor-responsive conversion. Having said that, an extended follow-up work might be dedicated in the future to demonstrating analogies between human behavior in groups and macroscopic, including thermodynamic-based, physical principles and laws. With respect to that, after writing the book, I came across a 2019 paper called Physical Laws and Human Behavior, a three-tier framework. written by Shabam Musawi and Shyam Sunder. They published it in the Cowles Foundation discussion papers of the Yale University Library, and its citation is shown here. This is an important and exciting paper that supports from more analytical and physical and less mechanistic and cognitive perspectives the possible analogies between human behavior and physical laws. To finish this part, I believe that my views, as well as others, conform to the deterministic physicalistic approach which claims that the evolution of nature, including all instances of human behavior, and the energetic struggle emerging from the living, are causal, predetermined, and purely dictated by physical events governed by physical laws. The final lecture addresses several potential aspects of future progression in behavioral patterns among large groups and entire societies. Adhering to my previous assumptions, I believe that predetermined physical processes have evolved our minds to depend on systematic sets of physical reactions, observing, projecting, and interpreting changes in spacetime. Adopting a physicalistic deterministic standpoint, I assume that not only these reactions, projections, and changes are predetermined, but also the objectivity-seeking explanations of science for them among other universal occurrences. Accordingly, one may accept that at any point in time, we, individually and collectively, understand in quotation marks what has been determined for us by the physical evolution of nature. In this regard, I should also say that to the best of our knowledge, beliefs cannot change the universal laws of nature and are thus in this sense inferior to the physics behind their existence. This realization is somewhat breaking the symmetry needed for a genuine self/physics duality which was previously mentioned here. Conforming to these views, I regard each human as some sort of a deterministic reactor, converting forms of spatial contents and energies on the way to change nature's entropy, and consider his or her inner conversion processes and their trajectories, also including the sensor-responsive projections and down to the microscopic level of the individuality dimension, as causally connected physically. Such and other related processes lead to destined emergence of behaviors and struggles which are modestly contributing from our local habitat to changes in general spacetime. Given this, I should further emphasize that the predetermined nature of mind mechanisms, sensation and perception phenomenological conscious experiences, and human reactions contradicts our intuition. For our own survival and genetic benefits, the latter is inclined to illusively portray a fundamental self-control over one's own wills, actions, and many consequent experiences in life. Next, it seems that the deterministic progression leads humanity through and towards what can be interpreted as unavoidable catastrophes. I stress that a catastrophe is a human-made term which does not exist in the inanimate nature that lacks emotive connotations. While these events are generally overlooked by fundamental level laws of nature, their existence might potentially be implied from more complex sets of rules tailored to certain circumstances and conditions. Now, one prominent catastrophe relates to extinction, in our case of the entire human race, as an event that overcomes the forces attempting to oppose it and conserve our next generation's lives. Quite clearly, extinction might occur either via external forces which are not necessarily triggered by human intervention or through human catalyzed actions. A specific scenario refers to a situation in which humans cannot capture and convert enough energy over time to satisfy the basic genetic demands of their population. This might happen due to a practical incapability to do so, or when the total amount of accessible potential usability resources during this period becomes critically insufficient to sustain the demands of the living. Such situations are also expected to escalate the energetic struggle and lead to multiple chain reactions, some of potentially anarchistic nature, which might hold deadly consequences on societies. Sadly, we even have the power to extinct ourselves before facing an acute energetic crisis. Wars employing mass destruction weapons, careless or vicious actions that harm the protective characteristics of the habitat or which provide critical advantage to competing species, viruses for example, mass manipulation of minds against their self-inherent functions and other misconducts provide potential hazards which can eventually cost humanity its life. Given some of these apocalyptic scenarios, humanity attempts to devise plans for preventing its own demise. At this stage, my book concisely discusses several potential measures promoting this goal and attempts to explore them from a more energetic, genetic, and psychoenergetic oriented perspectives. Some of the possible strategies discussed relate to implementations of regulations of social laws, reducing overconsumption of global resources, limiting reproduction, researching and developing technologies which aim to enhance the collection, conversion, and storage efficiencies of energy resources. Further mentioned in the book are the aspirations to energetically exploit current unpopulated regions on Earth and hypothetically also colonize possibly habitable exoplanets in our galaxy. Regarding the potential self-triggered extinction of humankind, I emphasize the idea that our struggles and collaborations are greatly impacted by the distributions of beliefs and emotions encrypted structures in our spatially separated minds. Consequently, all the beliefs and factors which influence human behavior and that might affect our extinction or survival as a race, including our national, racial, religious, political, polarity-related, and other views, can also be physically correlated with relative differences and similarities in mind structure distributions among humans. In other words, relative differences and similarities in our unique minds and the phenomenological conscious experiences emerge from them push us to fight and unite. They do so while ignoring our hereditary aspired mechanistic equality. This structuralist approach may be integrated in studying the evolution of our species along its way to predetermined destiny. These ideas bring us back to the topic of beliefs and their changes. Hand in hand with the development of various technological and scientific capabilities and skills, some of our beliefs evolve as well. Looking from a wide perspective, one may parallel this evolution to a struggle between spatially separated mind structures whose fate is deterministically shaped by certain physically driven processes. Such perspective relates also to Richard Dawkins' ideas, including those appearing in his book The Selfish Gene, and the works that follow them regarding memes as carriers of communicatively replicated cultural units. Whereas social and cultural influences on and by the evolving memes have been mainly ascribed to communication dynamics entailing different threshold conditions and selection rules, I wish to complement these views and focus here on the bidirectional correlation between internal changes in the beliefs encrypted structures, the BES, of the communicators, and the latter's external energetic struggle. A prominent factor affecting in recent years both the energetic struggle and the struggle between different beliefs is the technology-assisted advance of communication. This man-made progression demonstrates the increasing power of remote copy-paste sort of dissemination of BES in believers' minds, regardless of the specific phenomenological conscious experiences the process evokes. The development of easily accessible modern communication tools and social media enable their use as catalysts for both serial and parallel, and often exponential, relaying of beliefs that can rapidly reach significant parts of humanity. This effective distribution methodology provides a clear indication for the power of communication to gather or separate humans around relative similarities in BES, and thus frequently also to catalyze their genetic amelioration. Indeed, after the foundation of the basic infrastructure required for enhanced level communication, current dissemination of beliefs to the masses has become a far more facile and routine process. As such, it currently requires a significantly reduced energy investment in instantly bridging many minds. With respect to that, we can hypothetically relate any momentary distribution state of specific beliefs to present and past contributions of their dissemination and BES assimilation in the macro assembly of the separated believer's mind. Such contributions are affected by the self-energetic perceptions, relative polarities, and many other psychoenergetic and individual parameters related to the contributors. Hence, one may connect the struggle between beliefs to the human struggle over energy resources and attempt to identify some correlated behavioral trends within their coupled evolutions. Now, our experience shows that some belief-encrypted structures are communicatively replicated throughout many generations and reach numerous individual ecosystems. This almost inertia-like progression continues until a dramatic energetic change concerning the involved people appears and introduces a significant enough force to stop or affect it. Currently, a considerable force is held by strong distributors of beliefs. Some are known as media influencers. These individuals are typically well connected socially and are often invested in and rewarded for impacting the belief distribution assimilation process. Strong distributors trigger and/or effectively amplify the spreading of their own or others' energetically biased beliefs using certain skills related to operating and manipulating communication catalysts. While a strong distributor does not necessarily have to possess exceptional energy resources or high leadership potency, his or her contributions may still leave a remarkable energetic impact on those being affected by them. Accordingly, I may refer to another type of polarity between humans, a communication polarity, reflecting their relative potencies to distribute beliefs and energetically genetically impact others. Accordingly, it can be used to insinuate the relative advantage in this regard of the strong distributors in the general struggle. Before moving on, I would like also to briefly acknowledge the influence of flaws in the consistency and reliability of the BES copying process on the development of beliefs. Some of the flaws can be viewed as divergent mutations related to the unique mind states of the communicating people and to the environmental conditions biasing them during the transfers. Looking from a broad perspective over these concepts, one may indicate a predestined connection between the biophysical struggles which have shaped our minds and their mechanisms and the struggles for the distribution and survival of the beliefs they have created. The use of terms such as survival and replication in this context implies that with respect to the genetic goals of their human distributors and carriers, beliefs and their evolution can also be approached as incentivized by energy-centered targets. Further to this, the energy investments of humans in conserving and strengthening beliefs, while overcoming their spontaneous changes or dissipation, can be further paralleled to the hereditary targets of guardianship and enhancement. Namely, we can clearly identify analogs to all genetic goals in the human-directed evolution of beliefs. Talking about the power of communication and its flaws, I show here a highly simplified example of how a belief resulting from the interpretations of a certain sensed object on the left becomes shifted through various personal, extended group, communicative and other biases while propagating among people. As you can see, I also use vertical arrows to mark the effects of different, mainly energetic-based influences which tend to virally shift beliefs towards more extreme reference points for truth. Some of these can be associated with potential amplifications made by strong influencers along the distribution path. Accordingly, one may often identify gradually escalating dichotomous or other patterns in the evolution of beliefs which get further away from the physical observational truth in quotation marks of the special event they refer to. I believe that we should always be aware of these processes and trends whenever siding in rumors and adopting views towards issues which may energetically influence us and others. The book continues to raising different concerns regarding the growing influence of communication on humans. One concern relates to the potential increase in relative mind structure similarities due to the extensive use of over-normalized communication patterns. I believe, for example, that the use of emojis, emoticons, GIFs, stickers, and the likes narrows down the spectrum of vectorial expressions one is naturally employing while articulating beliefs, emotions, and feelings. The same applies to the almost automated, succinct text messages which often replace nowadays richer and more comprehensive ways to interact and exchange beliefs and impressions. To this concern, one may add the increased, mainly escapism-focused, time being spent on limited choices kind of social media. Such contemporary behavioral trends further contribute to minimizing differences in BES distributions among humans and may hence lead to a relative unification in our response patterns, despite an expected loss of some aspects of subjectivity and creativity among individuals who intensively expose themselves over long durations to these evolved communication products. I also acknowledge the latter's beneficial contributions to subjecting their users and providing them with an easy, low-energy investment requiring access to human knowledge. An additional benefit in this regard is the reduction in the mutative flaws associated with the distribution of this knowledge. Now, it is clear that communication provides leaders and strong influencers who master it with potential power. While this power can serve humanity in different ways, it can also be viciously abused, for instance via deliberately spreading disinformation, incitement, and propaganda, while promoting narrow, energy or leadership-related interests of groups and individuals. One may also mention in this regard the possible hazards in distributing sensitive human information such as biometric and other personal details. A different kind of threat is posed by escapist addictions attempting to over-satisfy different urges. If we scrutinize, for example, the current addiction of many people to digital screens, we find that not only does this screen dependency disorder shorten the time they spend on genetic-focused activities in their own favor, but that it also significantly competes with experiencing the external to the screen spacetime, with its additional important implications. Namely, in parallel to the apparent advantages of the electronically communicated media, these human-made attention attractors might dangerously turn into, in quotation marks, black holes for the genetic favored behavioral states of some individuals, and as such will slow down to a certain extent the macro-level progression of the species. Despite these risks, a complete avoidance of or disengagement from the communication traffic exposes humans to several dangers and increases their chances of missing energetic genetic opportunities. In this complex mosaic of energy-oriented inclinations and biological drives, exchanged beliefs, and developing technologies, I can only hope that future advances in communication will turn out to be harmless and mostly beneficial for the human race. Last, I would like to address a few behavioral trends which are already being practiced or that might be facilitated in the future via technological advances. One contemporary example concerns complementary solutions to the realization of our genetic goals. Such common practices may occasionally even catalyze the realization processes by overcoming certain natural barriers. Given the right circumstances, including an investment of adequate resources in the matter, individuals who wish to have children but are temporarily or permanently incapable to, can practice different present-day options related to fertilization or adoption. In the case of the latter, it can be noticed that despite the relatively increased genetic dissimilarity between the adopting individuals and the adopted infants, the act may still lead to fulfillment of the guardianship and enhancement targets from both the standpoints of the adoptive parent and the evolving species. In another example, guardians rely on other humans in temporarily taking care of their offspring. By doing so, the guardians may free up their time for alternative genetic or escapist-focused activities, while normally energetically paying for it by transferring external ESTP resources to their helpers for their invested efforts and time in the matter. Namely, human beings have developed practices and are harnessing technologies which allow them to exchange potential energies with genetic assignments. Now, as in the case of communication, many other technological advances hold the potential to harm humanity. One fundamental concern is what I call the piracy of privacy with respect to the decryption of the mind. Our increasing understanding of physics and brain sciences, combined with gradually improving engineering and computing-based skills, and among the latter machine learning and artificial intelligence, for example, draw us nearer to developing sensor systems and cognition models that might eventually unveil the mechanisms behind the core mind functions. From basic polygraphs to brain-implanted electrodes, listening in vivo to communicating neurons, and from advances in quantum computers capable of effectively analyzing the unprecedented amount of data associated with such experiments to recent non-invasive decoding of cortical semantic presentations by fMRI, we can envisage a gradual progress in the abilities to read and control human minds. All these provide an explosive potential for vicious, selective mind-reading, copying and writing activities that can sharply imbalance the energetic struggle through altering the mind states and behaviors of the victims in ways that benefit the abusers. And indeed, in an absence of strict legislation and enforcement to limit such knowledge from being obtained, disseminated and abused, it might fall into the wrong hands and pose a serious threat to humanity. Considering this possible mind-taking over scenario, several additional assumptions can be made. The first suggests that as a means to struggle piracy of privacy attempts that hold energetic incentives, nature has intentionally evolved the complex mind-brain functional system to be hard to decipher and affected by foreign biasing effects. Another possibility, which nevertheless seems quite challenging from several mechanistic and time perspectives, assumes that as a part of this strong decryption mechanism, close to the, in quotation marks, event horizon of physiological mechanistic mind decoding, which might be self-sensed by some sort of a perception-based feedback, a mutation will be formed. This mutation will proactively trigger possibly dormant and as accelerated as possible processes to strengthen the encryption of some of the mind's operational principles. From the brain's perspective, such processes might entail changing firing mechanisms, thresholds, processing tracts, and so on. Irrespective of this scenario, in case of a prolonged and fierce energetic struggle, we might also expect an evolutional branching of mind structures and functions within humans. Such branching could be based on severe objective polarities between stronger and weaker populations, resulting from continual accrued differences in energetic intakes from the environment. Along the attempts to correlate physics, beliefs, and mechanistic interpretations of human behavior, we have encountered numerous challenges, where limitations imposed by belief intractability issues, subjectivity, veridicality, latency of the mind, and objective physical uncertainties have all become an inevitable part of this story. Being aware of these obstacles and believing that basic physical principles govern our emergent biology and all its products, including the ones associated with perception and belief, I attempted to approach the sensor-responsive systematicness of the human by generally referring to it as a sequential set of coupled micro-scale reactions. These were believed to progress contingently through overcoming physical compatibility constraints and energy barriers on the way to form critical life functionalities. My particular interest in mind processing mechanisms that direct perception-based responses to circumstantial, situation-specific triggers has led me to suggesting several assumptions regarding possible correlations between inherent principles of mind operations which guide cognition and the physical laws of the evolving nature. While believing that my book and its reflections in this set of lectures offer many additional, related and unrelated insights and interpretations that deserve your full attention, I decided to narrow down the concluding remarks into two minimized parts: a few crux of the matter concepts and the reduced list of complementary assumptions holding a potential for further scientific assessments and philosophical debates. The first important assumption suggests that pristine mind mechanisms and the mind's ability to projectively observe, process, and respond to environmental changes have been locally shaped by evolutionary, in quotation marks, struggles, deterministically driven by reactions that comply with the physical laws of general spacetime. These human traits and the responses they enable further contribute to the evolution of nature in compliance with its favorable energetic and entropic propensities. One possible consequence of this evolutionary process is that environmentally triggered perception-based behavior is established through the formation of a sequence of layered phenomenological expressions involving sensation, different perceptions, and higher cognition processes, including thinking and decision-making. Within these, the individual energy perception is a prominent cognitive tool operating harmonically with other core perceptions in predicting and grading the implications of the individual's potential interactions with spatially recognized elements on the realization of several fundamental genetic targets, and particularly on the conservation or improvement of his or her achievements in this regard. Namely, the conversion of physical stimuli arriving to the sensory systems of our bodies triggers, especially while being immersed in the genetic-focused behavioral state, a systemic mind evaluation in search of potentials of energetic genetic interest and value for us. These potentials are then used as a substrate for further energetic assessments regarding the execution of the responses. In accord with these assumptions, I tend to believe that sensoperceptive mechanisms direct us energetically genetically towards a certain behavior in spacetime. Another important assumption is that the mechanisms determining our functional responses, including the hypothesized genetic lensing, perception, and perception-based behavior, are coupled to psychoenergetic biases. These biases reflect some of our circumstantial, more significant individual experiences from and impressions of the struggle over the realization of the human genetic goals. Affecting our assimilated beliefs and emotions, such experiences impact the processing stage of the sensor-responsive conversion and consequently our behavior. In addition to that, some of the life events that establish and shape the psychoenergetic biases, including our own birth, for example, are believed to introduce us to projections of certain physical principles of nature. Based on these assumptions, with an emphasis on the energy perception, I further postulated that, despite being externally biased, the algorithms like cognitive operators directing the perceptive mechanisms have evolved to correlate with physical laws of nature and as such reflect some of their fundamental principles. In accord with this perceptive physical dimension postulation, and in attempt to decipher pristine aspects of mind mechanisms, I suggested a comprehensive search for analogs to fundamental physical principles related to the evolution of nature as we know them, in perceptive or behavioral reflections in humans. Appropriate lower complexity principles will then be bottom-up integrated in order to yield more advanced physically based cognitive algorithms that strive to fit commonly observed human sensor responses to relatively fixed spatial triggers. This perspective suggested an approximation according to which our perceptive and then behavioral sensor responses can be algebraically/physically reduced to two coupled functions: the genetic-based perceptive physical dimensions, PPD, and the unified bias function of psi. The latter distribution includes the individual's psychoenergetic contributions and might be statistically correlated with those of other humans in an attempt to unbiasedly explore the PPD. Such approach may complement the current neurological and behavioral studies which attempt to analyze cognition processes from the meso and macro levels with respect to this physically reduced perspective. Furthermore, it is assumed that despite being emergent and deviating from simple upscaled projections of discrete energy perceptions, energetic considerations in human groups also tend to reflect the bottom-up association of integrated physical building block laws and concepts. I will now present a shortened list of important complementary assumptions. Again, many additional ideas which can be found in the lectures and the book were deliberately omitted from the list. The first assumption views beliefs as phenomenologically emerging from potentially metastable distributions of spatial contents which are associated with separated yet possibly communicating mind arrays in spacetime. The states of these mind array distributions determine our interpretations of spacetime and the subsequent actions we take to change it. As these processes are bound to universal physicalistic deterministic dictates, all beliefs and their own distributions amongst humans are also predetermined. That said, I assume that in a similar way to the energetic struggle over resources, beliefs can also be perceived as struggling. The struggle of beliefs has been accelerated by revolutions and technology advances, which acted as its catalyst, and its consequences were assumed to serve, in quotation marks, the evolution of nature through affecting the localized energetic struggle of humankind. Another related struggle that is assumed to exist is over individuality and uniqueness, and its exploration might involve basic entropy considerations. In this regard, technology advances, including those related to modern communication, can lead to increased relative similarities between human minds and hold the potential to accelerate our demise. One prominent factor affecting beliefs is the psychoenergetics of their carrier humans. I assumed the existence of an energy belief dependency correlating the resistance of beliefs to changes with the strength of the energetic genetic exchange during the events which have facilitated their assimilation. I assume the role of emotions as crude indicators for energetic assessments. I treated the human self as combined spatial and genetic energetic points of reference for perceptive assessments whose phenomenological experiences and the interpretations they provide to the experienced spacetime converge in the consciousness of the individual, defining his or her self-perception and narrative. I distinguished between several behavioral states also on the grounds of their threshold levels for direct and immediate energetic genetic motivations. Additionally, I hypothesized that along with more conventional dissipation pathways, mind emission processes, including all kinds of phenomenological conscious experiences, contribute to release of excessive sensory energy from the mind. I introduced the hypothetical property of individuality and further related it to the physical structural uniqueness formed during production of functionality. With respect to humans, I also correlated this property with objective systematic differences in sensing spacetime through what I called broad individuality. I proposed the concept of genetic lensing and its subconscious role in our spatial and energetic perceptions. I hypothesized the existence of changes in mind mechanisms at a close proximity to the life-death boundaries. I speculated that beliefs and their evolution amongst humans are incentivized by inherent energetic genetic considerations and targets. In accord with that, I identified analogs to all genetic goals both in the survival and replication of beliefs and in investing human energy in their conservation and amelioration. I would like to mention a few possible ways to extend this work. One elementary direction to pursue, which has also been mentioned in the lectures, is to reach for analogies between physical principles and human behavior, both at the micro and the macro scales. When it comes to these, one may further use his or her vivid imagination, for instance, upon suggesting human equivalents to the fundamental elementary forces in nature, when attempting to reason nature's formation of the classical-like similarities between the brain's neural connections and the cosmic web, while comparing our birth, life, and death cycles with those of celestial objects like stars, or when considering the latency of the speculated dark matter and energy in the universe. Another interesting path to follow is based on the assumption that the footprints of the perceptive physical dimension, in the form of physical laws dictated behavioral patterns, might be found, complex and biased as they are, in the past and ongoing evolution of historical and/or economic events. Researching history and economy and detecting such footprints is expected to provide us with new anthropological, sociological, and economic perspectives that can be valuable for the future of our species. One may also consider developing a combined deterministic psychoenergetic approach that will harness the insights presented here, including those regarding our energetic genetic assessments, responses to triggers and struggles with others, towards serving as a psychological therapeutic aid. Understanding such factors and being aware of their methodical and circumstantial roles in our lives and their impacts clearly cannot change our inherent mind mechanisms, yet bound to the universal deterministic dictate, they might affect our energetic selves and assessments of experiences, while reducing the levels of our fears and suffering. Finally, I re-emphasize my call for a future debate and possible development of the ideas presented in order to improve the understanding of our self-functions and functioning. I wish that the insights will assist mitigating some aspects of the human struggle and contribute to the formation of a nicer environment for future generations to live in. If you find the concepts shown interesting and can do so, consider citing me and writing me an email so I can thank you. I appreciate the time you took for watching this video.